Hello, welcome back to the Preservation Celebration virtual event for 2020. I'm here with Kathryn Gilbery, and she is with the Seed Savers Exchange. They're a company headquartered in Decorah, so it's really nice to have another Iowa business here. She'll do a presentation for us talking about Seed Savers and how you can be involved, and then we'll have a short Q&A afterwards. So here we go.
Great, thank you, Marissa. I'm really excited to be here. It's great to be able to reach more people through this virtual format. So I am going to share my screen here. I have a PowerPoint. Let's see, share screen. Oh, not that share. That's sent. All right, can you see that all right? Perfect. All right, so my name is Kathryn Gilbery, and I work for Seed Savers Exchange. So we are a nonprofit located in Decorah, Iowa, as Marissa said. This is a picture of one of our display gardens and our visitor center. So even though we're not able to be in person right now, just want to preface everything by saying that our farm is open to the public. So if you've never been to Decorah, it's a really beautiful area, part of the Dripless region. We have walking trails, trout stream, display gardens, apple orchard. So it's a great place to come and explore if you have a weekend where you want to get out of the house and whatnot. So this story presentation is preserving seeds and their stories. So we are the largest non-governmental seed bank in the country. What that means is that we are preserving mostly vegetable varieties, but we do also have some fruits, flowers, grains, and herbs in our collection. And our focus is on American heirlooms. So things that have been grown by people, average gardeners, passed down to their family members over generations. And along with those seeds, we also want to preserve their stories. And this is something that distinguishes us from other seed banks. The USDA seed bank has a much larger collection, but they're solely interested with preserving the germplasm. And it takes a lot of work to do that and to maintain the collection of the size they have. So they're not able to do as much research into the stories or the history behind seeds, but that's something that those stories we hold really true to our heart as well. So just a tiny bit about myself. So I've been here at Seed Savers for a few years now. I'm the exchange and outreach coordinator. So I do education and speaking events like this. And then the exchange is a program I manage. It was the very first program that Seed Savers ever had, and was simply a paper directory seed swap that people from across the country could participate in. We created this organization to facilitate individual gardeners to be sharing seeds that were important to them and their families with other gardeners, with the idea that seeds would be safer if they were grown by more people. So with family heirloom seeds, kind of within that name, they're within a family and maybe only have a few people within that family growing those seeds. And so by enabling gardeners to engage with each other and share those seeds, they were able to proliferate. And so we still coordinate this exchange program, this gardener to gardener seed swap, and I coordinate that as well. So the agenda for today, we're going to talk about what an heirloom seed or plant is. That word, we hear it a lot these days, and so I'm going to tell you what our definition is, the role of Seed Savers Exchange in preserving seeds and stories, and then how you can preserve your own seeds. So we're going to go through kind of the basic information you need to know if you would like to save your own seeds from your own garden. So I'll have pictures of some things from our collection throughout this presentation. So these are Benary's giant zinnia. They're super popular, one of our best-selling items because they are just every color of the rainbow, big blooms. They bloom all summer. And then you can see that it says available from the SSE catalog. So you can access that catalog via our website. We also mail print catalogs to people for free. So if you're interested in getting on the mailing list for a catalog, you can visit our website, which is seedsavers.org. That's in the bottom corner there. And you can just click catalog and get on the mailing list. So you'll get it in your mailbox right when it comes out. So that is what we're going to talk about today. I will also leave some time for Q&A. And yeah, let's get started. So my first question is, what is an heirloom? We hear that term a lot. You can go to the grocery store and today you're almost certain to find heirloom tomatoes. But what does that mean? And then I'll mention, so this picture is a purple olive shaped radish and it says available from the exchange. So the exchange is the platform via which we offer seeds from our seed bank collection that we haven't regenerated quite enough yet to put it in the catalog, but we have them on the exchange instead. So I'll share where that website is at the end of the presentation as well. So an heirloom variety is simply a variety which has a history of being grown, saved, and shared. That's it. And so this is an example of Umama's Hungarian peppers, which was donated to us by the individual here, David Sokasi. And then this picture, this other picture in the black and white, is of his grandfather. And Umama actually means grandmother in Hungarian. And so a quick way you can recognize if a variety is an heirloom is a lot of them have a name of the steward within the name. So we have Aunt Ruby's German green tomato is one that's gotten really popular. Grandpa Ott's morning glories, Umama's Hungarian peppers. So they're just seeds that have been grown by families and they have saved their seeds over generations and passed them down just like you would an heirloom piece of furniture or heirloom jewelry or something like that. And then I have a few varieties that are heirlooms from our collection here as well. So I mentioned that we also collect some of the history behind our heirloom seeds within our collection. And not always, but sometimes we get a recipe along with a donated variety. So this is Winfrey Family Permelon squash. Squash are super exciting because they come in so many different shapes and sizes and colors, and even the flavor can range anywhere from something that is, really sweet, and you want to eat it in desserts, things that are really savory. So this is a cookie recipe that I haven't tried making, but I really want to make this year. And I can, if it's helpful for you, I can share this in an email or something as well, so you can share it. You can let me know at some point after the conversation. But so this is a really exciting melon. Another one, we grew this safflower this year. And not only is it really beautiful and intriguing, it also has a culinary purpose. So this was donated by Marilyn Loom. Her family immigrated from Italy, and they would use it to prepare a dish similar to risotto. Risotto is usually kind of the term that we hear, or that I'm familiar with like a really creamy rice dish that usually has cheese in it and a yellow color. And that yellow color often comes from saffron, But within this family, instead of saffron, they were using the petals from this safflower. And so it kind of essentially dyes the rice this nice yellow color and also provides some flavor as well. We also have a recipe for that here. I'll mention that this safflower we do have available on the exchange, but we just grew it this year to regenerate, which means that we're hoping to have it in the catalog within a couple of years. But if you don't want to wait until it's in the catalog, you can get it this year. So something that is really interesting, fascinating kind of about this recipe is that risotto is kind of more traditionally made with Parmesan cheese and safflower, I already mentioned. But these folks, when they immigrated, they moved to Wisconsin, and they didn't have access to Parmesan, but they had access to cheddar cheese. And so this is made with cheddar cheese. And then they also mentioned within this recipe, so risotto is often made with a short grain rice, which is starchier than long grain rice. And so that helps make it creamier, but they didn't have access to that short grain rice when they immigrated to Wisconsin either. So they used a longer grain rice, which you can find at any grocery store. And then to compensate for it not being as creamier, the cheese also comes in handy there. They add a lot of cheese. And so I made this year, and it was super delicious. Another thing I love about this recipe is that, you know, they adapted what maybe they would have used when their family was in Italy. Those ingredients weren't as available here in the United States. But now over the last 50, 60 years that they've been making this recipe, grocery stores have expanded, and you can find risotto rice. You can find Parmesan cheese, but they've continued to make it now the way that their family has always made it in Wisconsin. So how cool is that? So moving on to some information about Seed Savers Exchange. I have our mission written here to conserve and promote America's culturally diverse but endangered food crop heritage for future generations by collecting, growing, and sharing heirloom seeds and plants. So you can see just this picture of squash. It's, you know, definitely diverse. But how many of these squash have you actually seen in a grocery store before? Like I mentioned before, squash is just so amazing. So many different colors and shapes and sizes and flavors and purposes and textures. And, you know, so of course we want to preserve those because they are all so amazing and delicious. And then, so we're collecting these varieties. We still have people reach out to us to donate new seeds every year. Growing, we have to maintain these within our collection. So the majority of the time they're stored in our vault, which is essentially just a freezer kept at 0 degrees Fahrenheit. But we do have to monitor those for viability, regenerate them. So that's the growing portion, and then sharing. You know, we have these seeds and we want you to be able to access them as well. So this is a picture of some of the seeds from our catalog that we have available. We have about 600 varieties that we offer in our catalog every single year. But within our seed bank, which we have open access via the exchange website, we have over 5,000 varieties available to the public. So, but how did this get started? Our co-founders are Diane Whaley, who is pictured here, and Kent Whaley. And this organization also began with a story. So that feeds into why, even to this day, we are interested in these stories. So Diane and Kent were married in about 1974, 1975. And at that time, her grandfather, who is pictured here, Baptist John Ott, gifted her seeds for their wedding present to her. And those two varieties that he gave her are these Grandpa Ott's Morning Glory, and then the tomatoes there that Diane's father is holding, these German pink tomatoes. These were varieties that Diane was familiar with. She had helped save seeds from these when she was growing up, so she knew they were important to her family, but it wasn't until she was gifted these varieties from her grandfather on their wedding day that he told her, you know, these have actually been in our family for much longer. It was his grandfather or great-grandfather who immigrated to the United States from Bavaria and brought those seeds with them from that mother country. So these are something that had been in her family for years and years and years, generations. But shortly after she received these, her grandfather passed away. And so that struck her, you know, for a number of reasons. She was the only one growing these seeds at that time. And so, you know, they were so important to her. But we all, if all of us who garden, know that lots of things can happen in a garden year to year that can prevent you from having a good crop. There's also things that can happen to your seed supply in an off season that could affect whether or not you have those seeds to grow again. And so she was concerned about maintaining her own seeds, but also her and Kent were wise enough to think, you know, this probably is not a problem unique to us. Think about all the other gardeners out there who probably have seeds that are very important to them that they can't buy from seed catalogs. They're not available from seed companies. And how can we keep these safe? And so they decided that they needed to start something. They didn't want to start a seed bank. They weren't thinking quite that big. They wanted something manageable. So what did they do? They started what was called the True Seed Exchange. Within a few years, they changed that name to Seed Savers Exchange. But it was essentially this gardener to gardener seed swap. Gardeners could write to Diane and Kent and tell them, I have seeds that I want to share. And then they put that information into just one packet and then mail that information back out to their participants. So they weren't planning on receiving any of the seeds or having to maintain a seed collection. It was merely allowing gardeners to communicate with each other and share seeds so that more people could be growing them. But turns out this, you know, was an idea, a concept that a lot of people connected to, but these gardeners that had really important seeds to their families weren't quite satisfied with the idea of simply sharing them with other gardeners. They wanted somebody to take these seeds and save them indefinitely. So pretty soon, Diane and Kent started to receive packages in the mail. I think I have a picture of that here. Yeah, so on the one side, we have kind of the early days of the seed collection. Things would just show up, essentially. And they decided, wow, you know, people are sending us these seeds. They must be important. We should save them. And so they continued to acquire more and more varieties. And today, this is a picture of our vault. It's kept at 0 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about -18 Celsius. They're in these kind of foil packets, which are resistant to water or heat damage. And it's estimated that seeds stored under these conditions will be viable for 100 years. And so we do germination testing on our seed. Germination testing, really all that entails is taking some seeds, putting them on a wet paper towel. We have an incubation chamber that we put them in to control the temperature a little bit, but you could just leave them out on your counter if you wanted to do your own germination test. And then we come back and check those seeds a few days later. Count how many sprouted. If you have 90 out of 100 seeds that sprouted, that's a 90% germination test. That's a pretty good result for most things. If we have lower germination for something, then we're like, all right, guess we need to regenerate this year and get some fresh seed stock. But we only actually test most of the varieties in our collection once every 10 years. And typically, most things are good. And we can, so we're working on germ testing our varieties that were last tested in 2010. Most of them have been fine. We package them back up, put them back in the vault, and we'll take them out again in 2030. So what does our collection entail? We have over 20,000 varieties right now. This graphic shows the size of the word is kind of how many things or what proportion of the collection is made up by those things. So our largest categories by far are tomatoes and beans. And you can also see we have peppers kind of come next, apples, lettuce, watermelon, lima beans, cucumbers, lots of different things. Tomatoes and beans, we have the most of those for a number of reasons. They exhibit a lot of diversity within those crop types. So you can have beans and tomatoes that are all different colors and sizes and flavors. They're also really easy to save seed from. So it is something that you can pretty easily save seeds from those every year. You can select them over time if you are looking for something a little bit different. Yeah, so that is kind of what our collection looks like. And so the next part I'll talk about is how to preserve your own seeds. So this information is kind of just going to be a general overview of seed saving. If this is the first time you're seeing some of this information, it might go by kind of fast, and you probably won't grasp all of it, but it's meant to be kind of an opener. And we have lots of resources on our website if you want to learn more about saving your own seeds. So we'll get started there. And then I don't have the name of this corn, but this picture here is a corn variety. We are very familiar with corn in Iowa. We see a lot of it, but typically, it's the very tall 10-foot, 12-foot corn that we see in fields. But corn can also exhibit a lot of kind of phenotypic differences. And so this is a shorter variety. It's not even the shortest variety that we have in our collection. We have ones that are even shorter than this. And what's happening in this picture, corn is wind pollinated. So the pollen that is produced on these tassels makes its way to the pollen receiving the shoot, what's going to be the cob, via wind. And because in Iowa we have so much corn, to prevent those different varieties from crossing, we hand pollinate everything. So that is what is happening in this picture. All right, so what do we need to know in order to save our own seeds? I have 6 things here that we'll go through. So first, know your seed, know your plants, isolation, when and how to harvest your seed, how to store it. And one of the great things about saving seed is you often end up with more than you need. So abundance is a really great thing from gardens. If you've ever planted a zucchini, you know something about the abundance that gardens can produce and how you get to make friends with your neighbors, friends or family by sharing your produce. And so same thing with seed saving, you're going to have extra seeds. And so it's really important to know how to share those varieties. And then we want to have fun when we're doing it too. Otherwise, what's the point? And I guarantee you will have fun. So this is the answer to that first question, know your seed. There's kind of two kinds of seed that I have here, open pollinated and hybrid. So any seed is one of these two categories. The difference is that an open pollinated variety is one that generation after generation, the seeds and the fruit or the vegetables that they produce is going to look the same generation after generation. Hybrid is when you take two distinct separate varieties and cross them, and then that next generation is going to be the seed that is sold. And so you can recognize a hybrid within a seed catalog because it will either say F1, that means it is the first generation after a cross, or it will say hybrid, so one of those two things. At Seed Savers Exchange, we only have open pollinated varieties within our collection. Since since those seeds produce the exact same results every single year, they're easy to save seeds from. They're going to look the same. Whereas a hybrid, when you take those two separate varieties, cross them, you end up with a really nice uniform F1 generation. But if you save those seeds the next year, oftentimes they'll revert back to one of the parents or some other kind of crazy combination. And so you can save seeds from these, it's legal, but you're gonna end up with potentially a really crazy grab bag of a whole bunch of different stuff. So hybrid is something, hybrid seeds were introduced into the seed trade in about the 70s, 60s. So it's a relatively recent technology. You can still find open pollinated seeds, plenty of those. And then within this open pollinated section, anything that's an heirloom is going to be open pollinated. Anything that is a historic commercial variety, so we define that as 1950 or earlier, that's going to be open pollinated because we weren't producing or selling hybrid seed at that time. And then there are still plenty of modern commercial varieties that are being developed and sold as open pollinated seed. So if you have any questions about that, feel free to ask, and I can speak a little bit more about that at the end if we need. All right, so that was Know Your Seed. Number 2 is Know Your Plants. There's a number of things we have to understand about our plants in order to understand how to save seed from them. So the first one is the life cycle of our plant. We have annuals and biennials typically within what we grow in our vegetable gardens. And so some of these pictures, we have peppers, tomatoes, beans, spinach, things here. And annual essentially means that it is gonna produce seed within the first year that you grow it. And then here we have beans, fruits, lettuce, and some grains, most grains. Second are our biennials. This includes root vegetables, brassicas, chard, celery, parsley. With these biennials, the very first year, it produces the root or the vegetable, whatever it is that you want to eat, but it will not produce seed the first year. And so if you have been growing carrots in your garden, you maybe have never seen that carrot go to seed unless you forgot a carrot in the ground over the winter. So what we have to do for these biennials is, in this picture, they are harvesting kale. They're pulling off quite a few of those leaves. We package them up in soil or mulch or hay. Different things have different efficacies, and we'll store it in a root cellar over winter, plant them again a second season, and it's in that season that it will produce the seed. So this is a fun experiment that you can try. The great thing about these biennials You know, they take 2 years, but they are super abundant, especially brassicas. You grow a few cabbage or a few broccoli and let them go to seed, and you're going to have enough seed for years. So it's not something that you need to do every single year. You're going to get a lot of seed. You're going to be able to share seed. How wonderful is that? So the next thing to understand about our plants is the pollination method. So the big picture in the middle here is an example of insect pollination. This is kind of, I think, typically the image we have in our mind, or when we're very first taught about pollination in school. We learn how our fuzzy bumblebees will visit different flowers and move that pollen around. And when the pollen comes in contact with a different flower, then it will be able to produce seed. But that is one form of pollination. We also have varieties that are self-pollinated. That is a picture of a soybean. Within that, both the pollen producing and the pollen receiving parts are both on the same flower. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have wind pollinated varieties. And so this is a picture of spinach. And if you've had spinach bolt, because the weather got too hot, you'll notice that spinach actually has separate pollen producing and pollen receiving plants. So they're dioecious, and you can recognize the ones that produce the pollen because if you just tap it, it will just shed all this pollen, which is really fascinating. So each of these, the way they're pollinated affects how much space they need, how you need to isolate them, how many different varieties you can grow of the same crop type. So I'll go into that a little bit more deeply here. So this first pollination method that I'm going to talk about is self-pollination. This is a picture. We have peas here. Peas are self-pollinating. You can't even see. So let me see. I'll go back to this picture first here. But so each flower has a pollen producing part of the flower and then pollen receiving. And so you can see these really well on like daisies or lilies. The pollen producing parts, you know, you can see the pollen on them pretty easily. And then there'll be one pistil or stigma sticking up that on like a daisy, you can feel that it's actually sticky so that it catches the pollen, and that pollen will travel down that stigma to the ovule where it's fertilized. And so you can see them. You can see that it's very big and open on this flower. But if you look at this pea, you can't see those pollen producing or pollen receiving sexual organs. They're all totally enclosed within the flower. So that's important because it's not going to cross with anything else. So you can grow 2 or 3 or 10 varieties of peas within your garden and don't have to worry about them crossing. This other picture here is lettuce. So lettuce is something, maybe you've had lettuce accidentally bolt in your garden and you just pull it out. The next time you are growing lettuce, if you're growing lettuce this fall for winter crop, leave one in there and see what it looks like when it starts to produce seed. It'll get really tall and start to produce seed. We have them, we'll bag them, which is what's happening in this picture. It's not necessary, but we know that the seed for lettuce is really tiny, it's light, and so we'll put just a mesh bag over the top of lettuce so that as it dries down, if any of the seed falls off, we can catch it. So it just makes the harvesting process a little bit easier. So some other things that are self-pollinated, most legumes, this includes beans, peas, peanuts are a legume, also chickpeas, lima beans, cowpeas. We have lettuce, tomatoes, wheat. So there are also some crop types that will self-pollinate, so they don't need an insect or wind to transfer pollen around between multiple flowers in order for them to produce viable seed. But you see a picture here of a flower that is clearly producing a lot of pollen, and this bee is really happy with this flower. This is a picture of an okra flower. And so even though it's got a perfect flower, perfect cleft flower indicates that it can self-pollinate itself. We have a bee here that was really excited to visit it. You might go visit other okra flowers on his travels. And so if you're growing 2 different okra varieties, maybe a green okra and a red okra, and if you want to keep those separate, you have to consider how to prevent them from crossing. The other picture we have here is flowers from a tomato. So tomato is another crop type that is self-pollinating, but they're nice, pretty flowers. An insect might visit it. We have 2 flowers here. The one, I'm not sure if I can say left or right because this might be like mirrored, the presentation. But so the one closer to like the outside of the screen has an inserted stigma, whereas the one in the middle of the screen has an exserted stigma. And what that means, that stigma is the pollen receiving part of the flower, the one that is kind of sticky, that pollen will stick to, and that stigma travels all the way down to the base of that flower where the ovule is that will be fertilized. And so since you can see just a little bit of that stigma sticking out, it's at greater risk of being cross-pollinated, probably by an insect, than the tomato flower on the outside of the screen. So this is something to watch out for as well. A lot of us like to grow multiple kinds of tomatoes in our garden, maybe a big beefsteak, for sandwiches, but also a paste that's going to be good for salsa or sauce. And if you want to keep those 2 varieties distinct and separate from each other over time, we want to prevent that cross-pollination from happening. So you can take a look at your flowers and see, does this, and different varieties are kind of more prone to have either inserted stigmas or exserted stigmas. And so you can look at your flowers and decide if it's going to be okay without any sort of isolation technique. But if it's showing more of an exserted stigma, you might want to think a little bit about isolation methods, which we are going to talk about as well. So here I have tomato, okra, and beans are some self-pollinators that do cross. So for insect pollination, pretty much if you see a flower that is really big and beautiful, that plant has evolved over time to have a really showy flower because it relies on insects for pollination. So this squash is like, ooh, look at me, I'm super big, I'm beautiful, come check me out. And then this other picture is, I believe, some carrots. So cool thing about squash, they do have pollen producing and pollen receiving flowers on the same plant, but they are separate flowers. So you can see the one closer to the outside of the screen looks a little different from the one in the middle of the screen. Squash relies on an insect to travel in between those 2 flowers to pollinate them. You can get by having only 1 plant, and that 1 plant will produce both those flowers so that you can have successful pollination. This picture of the carrots We typically think of bees, as our insect pollinators, but there are a lot of other insects that can pollinate. So flies are really great for carrots. We actually use flies to pollinate our carrots every year. You might see hummingbirds visit your flowers. They can be pollinators as well. Moths, lots of different things. So we have alliums, dill, celery, brassicas, squash, melons, carrots, tomatoes, radishes, and this is just for starters. Like I said at the beginning, if it has a really beautiful flower, it's probably insect pollinated. Whereas corn, so this is our wind pollinated things. Most people don't look at corn and think, wow, look at that flower. You don't think of corn as even having a flower. But we have that tassel is what produces our pollen. And then the shoot is the silk on the corn, is what has to receive the pollen in order to produce a cob. And so I talked about this a little bit already, that we hand pollinate our corn in order to keep those varieties distinct and separate. Corn is probably our most labor-intensive crop here at Seed Savers Exchange. We have more information about hand pollination on our website. We also have supplies if you want to test this out in your own garden. But essentially, throughout most of the month of July and part of August, we have a couple people that are visiting our corn patch every single day to check for tassels and to check for shoots. They have to cover those up as they emerge. And then we're manually taking this tassel bag from the top of the corn, waiting for it to fill up with pollen, and then shaking it a bit, and then hand pollinating, bring that pollen onto the shoot or the corn cob. So that is how that process works. Corn, we have corn for popcorn, for flour, for sweet corn. It comes in all sorts of colors. But because it is kind of difficult to keep these varieties separate, we don't have nearly as much corn in our collection as we do those self-pollinating crops or even insect-pollinated crops. Like I forget exactly how many corn varieties we have in our collection, but yeah, not nearly as much as our tomatoes or beans. So some other things that are wind-pollinated: amaranth, beets. Beets and chard are very closely related. Spinach, we saw a picture of that a little bit earlier, and rye. So I mentioned a little bit about crossing, kind of the danger of that and how different pollination methods affect whether or not they will cross. So recall, if you have two separate varieties that you want to keep separate, we don't want the flowers from one to pollinate the flower of another, because then you're going to end up with something kind of crazy the next generation. If you want a fun experiment in the garden, go ahead and let your stuff cross. You can cross it on purpose and see what you get. That's how we get new varieties. You might discover something that you really, really love. So this picture here are isolation tents. This is probably more large scale than what you're going to do in your own garden. But essentially, we grow some varieties in each of these cages. We can grow a couple of different crop types within these cages, but we'll only grow one variety of each crop type in each cage. The fabric is mesh, so water, sunlight come through, but it's a tight enough mesh that pollen does not move around. For self-pollinating crops, we don't need to do any additional work in here besides planting them. We do plant insect-pollinated crops within our isolation tents, and in those cases, we have to manually introduce pollinators into those tents. So we actually order flies and bees They come to us in the pupa or larva stage, and we keep those under cooler temperatures. And then when we see that things are starting to flower and need to be pollinated, we can take those pupa out and put them in an incubator. And when they hatch, we release them into these cages and they fly around and do lots of really busy, good work pollinating our plants. So here within how to isolate your plants, there's some additional things we need to understand about our plants. So varieties matter and species matter. Plants of the same species will cross. Plants of different species typically do not cross. And it's not true that every crop type is always a separate, unique species. So on the one side here, we have Brassica oleracea. That's one species, but that one species has just been selected over time so that now we have cabbage, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi, kale, broccoli, cauliflower. Those are all the same species, but people have just been interested in different culinary purposes of those plants, and over time they've diverged so that cauliflower looks very different from Brussels sprouts, which looks different from kale, but they're still closely related enough on that evolutionary tree that they will still cross. So this is something, if you want to save seed from a cabbage and a kale, you want to keep those isolated from each other or they will cross, and then you'll have some crazy cabbage kale mutant hybrid the next year. If you recall, I mentioned that brassicas produce a lot of seed every year. So if you grow multiple of these different crop types and you want to save seed from them, you can grow kale for seed one year and grow broccoli for seed the next year and Brussels sprout for seed the next year, and have enough seed from each of those to get you through a couple of seasons until you want to regenerate that seed again. So on the other end of the spectrum, there are also things that we think of as one crop type. So squash, we think of that as there's different kinds of squash, but they're all squash. When we actually have different species of squash that do not cross. So Cucurbita pepo are zucchinis and summer squash, and these nice kind of orange jack-o'-lanterns fall into the Cucurbita pepo category. We have Cucurbita machata, which is our butternut. Cucurbita maxima. You don't see Cucurbita maxima in groceries as often because within the name maxima, these are big squash. And if you've ever grown a blue Hubbard, for example, you can get blue Hubbards that are like the size of a Thanksgiving turkey, where it takes up your entire oven in order to cook this squash. And then Cucurbita argyosperma. These are squash that are often grown for their seed. So all pumpkins and squash produce seed. If you make jack-o'-lanterns, you maybe eat some of the seed, but they have a coat or like a really thick seed coat, whereas our argyosperma squash are like the green pepita or pumpkin seed that you might buy in a grocery store. And so these produce green seeds and they are so delicious. So even though the squash, the flesh itself, often isn't all that great for eating, the seeds are just phenomenal. And so each of these are different species. So if you want to save seed from squash, you can grow one zucchini, one butternut, one maxima, one seed squash, and you don't have to worry about them crossing. If you're going to grow a zucchini next to a yellow squash, you might end up with some accidental crossing within that year. Within beans, we have common beans. These are black beans, kidney beans, pinto beans. We have runner beans, lima beans, fava beans, cowpeas, garbanzo beans. Those are each separate, unique species, so you can plant those without worrying about them crossing. Another thing you can do to prevent crossing is just grow one variety. This is a picture of a melon that we received donated to our collection. We know this melon is true to type because our donor, that's the only watermelon his family ever grew. That's one way to ensure that your things won't cross. We can isolate by distance. So self-pollinating plants, since they don't cross with each other, they can be 10 to 20 feet away, will be fine. Potential outcrossing plants, these are insect pollinated plants, are tomatoes and okra that can self-pollinate, but still insects visit them every once in a while. So we recommend 50 to 100 feet. Outcrossing plants up to half a mile is what we recommend. You don't have half a mile, you just have one garden. What can you do? There's a few other things. In this picture, we have isolated by time. So you can see in the very front, we have some lettuce that are just starting to bolt. In the back, we have lettuce that has already gone to seed. And so by isolating these by time, you don't have to worry about them crossing because their flowers are producing at different times. And with lettuce, or you might, already be planning on staggering your plantings a little bit so that you can have lettuce throughout the summer. So just keep those when you're staggering your planting, plant, a green lettuce, and then a week later, plant a red lettuce, and you'll be able to grow those with less chance of crossing. So isolation by containment, our big isolation tents, that's what we do on our farm, but you can also do isolating individual flowers. So in this picture, on one side, we have a tomato that has a flower with, this is essentially just a party favor or a jewelry bag. You can buy these online. Cover that flower. Only during the point at which it needs to be pollinated. The entire tomato was not going to fit inside that jewelry bag. So after it's been, this is a self-pollinated variety. So after you've given it enough time to pollinate and it starts to produce a little fruit, you can take that bag off, and you know that that fruit has just been pollinated by itself. We also have sunflowers here and a squash that has been hand pollinated. And then how to harvest your seeds. I've been rambling, and so I don't have a ton of time yet. I'll still answer questions as we need. So if you have questions that have been percolating in your mind, rest assured I will take time to answer those. But essentially, we have two kinds of, or seed can be divided into two categories. We have those that are ready to harvest when the fruit is ready. We have ones that need to mature longer. So you want to make sure that your seed is mature when you're harvesting it so that you have viable seed for the next year. So tomatoes, squash, peppers, melon, the seed is ready to harvest when the fruit is ready. Cucumbers and eggplant, on the other hand, have a later seed maturity. So if you've ever had a nice green eggplant get too big on the plant, it will even eventually start to turn orange or brown. Let it go, it'll get massive, and that's when those seeds are mature. If you grow green beans, you want to let those green beans mature until the seed pod is totally dry before you harvest it. And then we have dry seed processing and wet seed processing. So within dry processing, threshing is the process of removing the seed from the pod. Winnowing is the process of removing any extra chaff. And so that is typically done with fans or screens. This is something that you kind of just have to experiment and try by yourself to figure out what works best. And then we have wet processing. So that is when the fruit is wet when you harvest it. So I have information about this online. I won't go into it too much right now, but it actually goes through a fermentation process for tomatoes. So we put them in buckets, leave it there for like 3 days, and then decant it and dry it. It's important to know at what point your seeds are ready to go into storage. And so it's kind of a fine balance. If they're too wet and you can just squish them in your hand, they're not going to last as long. If they're too dry and they shatter or they break or they crack, that's also not going to work well either. So the perfect kind of moisture content is when you can poke your seed and it doesn't leave an indent from your fingernail, but it also doesn't crack. So that's what you're looking for. And then storing your seeds, it doesn't have to be in a 0-degree freezer. It doesn't even need to be in your fridge. It's the most important thing is that your seed is dry. Even at room temperature, most seeds are going to be viable for at least 3 to 5 years. If you also put them in the cold, they're going to be viable for much longer. This is an individual named Russ Crow, who has a seed collection in his basement. He just keeps them in glass jars and is able to preserve these for long term, and that works for him. And then very quickly, once you have all your seed harvested, what can you do with it? So there are a few ways that you can share your seed. Your community might host a seed swap of some kind, or you can offer to start a seed swap. You can just swap with your neighbors, with your friends. Seed libraries are kind of starting to pop up. They're often located in physical libraries, and seed libraries are always looking for donations of good quality seed. And once you get really excited about seed saving, think about how you can educate other people to get engaged in this work as well. I have a couple websites here. Exchange is where you can access our collection. You can also offer your own seeds. And then Community Seed Network is designed more for kind of a little bit larger seed saving thinking. So seed libraries, seed banks, folks that are interested in seed education, things like that. And then we have resources as well. And that is where I think I will leave that. I'm just going to show a couple websites really quick. So if you're interested in learning more about seed saving, I highly recommend our website. And this year for our conference, since it wasn't in person, we were able to record a lot of information via video and share it, which is something we have been talking about and wanting to do for years. And finally this year we had the time to do it. So if you go to seedsavers.org/conference, we have these are all videos that you can check out. If you go to resources, we have seed saving guides. And then let's see, whoops, my page here is kind of hiding because I don't know how to move this. There we go. This is what our community seed network page looks like. We have a learn tab where we have seed saving resources. We also have organizational resources. So if you're interested in seed libraries, seed banking, go here. And then the last page I have for us is exchange.seedsavers. And this is where you can access things from our collection. And we have over 5,000 varieties here. You can also request things from other growers. So just an example, if we go to vegetables, beans, one of the most popular crop types, check this out. We have 1,700 varieties of beans. So if you're looking for something new, something different, that is the place to go. And once again, here's my contact information if you want to reach out. My name is Kathryn, and my email is kgilbery@seedsavers. So I know it's 12 o'clock, but Marissa, if it's okay with you, if you have a little bit more time, I'm happy to stick around as well for a little bit.
Yeah, you did an excellent job and I learned a ton. So you answered a lot of questions as I was writing them down, but there are a few other fun little questions that I had. So thank you again for being so thorough because that was excellent. Um, so obviously we know every year as we're gardening, we have sometimes tomatoes that do really well one year, but other years you have a variety that just doesn't grow well. Are those seeds that you would recommend maybe not saving for your area or your region, or would you still recommend saving a seed that doesn't do as well for sake of maybe it was just the conditions that year?
Yeah, great question. And yeah, every year that we grow, we're faced with different growing conditions, different weather, different pest pressure. You also might have been testing out different, techniques in your own garden. The amazing thing about seeds is, they're smart. They have knowledge. Anytime they are faced with a challenge, they integrate that kind of into their seed memory. So if you're looking to, I guess I'll go maybe into seeds you should save, seeds that you save but you maybe want to kind of keep separate, and then maybe seeds that you don't want to save. So each year that you're growing in your garden, tomatoes, for example, you might be growing multiple plants of the same tomato that you want to save seed from. If you are, observant in your garden, watch for which plants do best. And then those are the ones that you want to save seed from, because that seed is going to remember. If it is faced with drought, for example, and that plant does really well, save that seed because you notice that it has some drought tolerance. You might not have drought the next year, but if you have drought pop up along the line years and years down the road, that seed still has that drought tolerance in it. We also recommend that every year that you save seeds, keep those different seed lots separate, and don't plant your entire seed lot in one year. So that helps you prepare if you do have a year where you just have a total failure of your seed. You're not totally wiped out of your seed lot because you held some of it back. Seed that we don't recommend saving if your plant is showing signs of disease. If the fruit is diseased, then don't recommend saving that seed. But yeah, if you see that a lot of your, plants were susceptible to disease, and then you have one that's really great, that is a good plant to save seed from.
Oh, sorry, my dog keeps walking around. So if you hear something in the background, that's him. Yeah, and that was a big part too. I think that's a really cool point, that because the seed remembers things, even writing a little note on your packet of seeds that you save that this is a really good drought tolerant seed, that would probably help for years to come. That's really cool.
And one of the really amazing kind of benefits of heirloom seed, since it was families saving that over time, those seeds are like super extra adapted to their own little microclimates. And so if you take an heirloom seed from a climate that's wildly different than yours, it might not do as well as like a hybrid seed that's been developed to be universally successful. But on the other hand, you might have heirloom seed that does really, really well. Or if you save your own seed over generations, it's gonna learn your climate and adapt to your growing conditions, so your growing methods, and be better than something you can buy from a seed company that was developed a state or a country away.
That's a large benefit to us as well, being in North Iowa, just a few hours away. It's really nice because a lot of the seed that you would get that's local will probably do pretty well here as well.
Yeah.
For insect pollinated varieties, would it be wise, if we know we have neighbors that garden, to also protect those and with some sort of mesh as well?
Yeah, so that is an important consideration. I garden in a community garden, and so there's lots of variety within my community garden. Um, it's a good opportunity to talk to your neighbors as well. And so if you maybe explain to them that you are growing something for seed, um, you can maybe try and convince them like, oh, I can grow this for seed this year. I'll share the fruit with you and some seeds if you don't grow that crop type or something. Um, you can collaborate with that neighbor to be, maybe we should both grow the same variety this year so that we have more of this fruit and more seed. But yeah, if you notice that your neighbor is growing the same crop type, it was planted at the same time as yours, and so it's flowering at the same time, you might want to take some methods to isolate that with a mesh bag or a simple isolation cage or something.
Great. How do you choose your varieties? Because we have some catalogs here as well. And so out of all of these, it's insane how many varieties there are. Yesterday, my husband asked, so which one of the cucumbers is a normal cucumber? And so it's obviously they all have benefits, but what is your process of choosing a variety?
Yeah, well, it is something that I struggle with as well, you know, because I also have access to all these seeds. And so I want to grow everything every single year. Um, but yeah, just think about what you're maybe interested in doing year to year. What sorts of things you're looking for in your seed, if you're looking for a disease adaptation, or if you're looking for a specific culinary aspect, or um, a color or a flavor or something. Yeah, and I mean, you can grow multiple things one year, see if you like something the best, and then choose to save seed from that in the future. It's kind of, you know, sometimes I just have to like close my eyes and like, because there's so much. This year, I tried my hand at saving seed from corn, and I grew 3 different varieties of popcorn, and then a flour corn and a flint corn. And you know, there's so many corns. I wanted to like grow them, but I think next year, in order to have a better seed supply, I'm just gonna grow a larger population of one variety of corn so that I can have, you know, a lot of seed and have that seed for a couple of years or something, or just eat a lot of polenta this year and next year eat a lot of sweet corn. But yeah, I mean, feel free. You don't have to save seed from every single thing you're growing. So maybe just pick like one crop type that you want to save seed from this year and only grow one variety this year. But you can grow a ton of varieties of something else that you're not going to be saving seed from this year. But
And the
yeah.
catalog has some excellent descriptions of each variety as well. I noticed that. That helps make the choice a little bit, but that's a good idea. Also recognizing every year we get to garden, so every year you can kind of try your hand at something new.
Yeah. And make friends. You know, if you each are growing a different variety, then you can get together and share those.
Yeah. What is your favorite seed so far?
That is so hard to choose. You know, it's really exciting to grow something for seed that under other circumstances, you don't actually ever see the seed. So like a radish, for example, when you typically harvest that at market stage, we call it. So things can be market mature or seed mature. And so a radish, if you're picking it at market maturity, you never get to see those seed. But when you grow something like that and then you let it experience its full life cycle, you know, you're making a closer relationship with that plant because you're getting to see it in every one of its stages. So those are exciting, but Also, I mean, something like corn where the seed is so unique and beautiful.
Mm.
Same thing with beans are really unique and beautiful. Um, and then there's seeds that are a little bit more challenging or require like a little bit more of the threshing process. Um, you actually succeed and have like really nice, clean seed. It just feels really exciting to have accomplished that as well. So I didn't tell you my favorite seed because I can't choose.
I wouldn't be able to either. All right, and then to end us off, what is your favorite story of any sort of variety?
Mm-hmm. I wonder if so this is one I have a lot I can talk about there too, but I'll find one with a picture. Um, let me see. But yeah, so many seed stories. And so at Seed Savers Exchange, we actually have a seed historian.
Oh, wow.
And so she is the one that is tasked with connecting with donors to be recording that story.
That's so cool. I didn't realize that that was such a big part of Seed Savers Exchange. So thanks for sharing that.
Um, and every seed has a story, you know. If we have these seeds purely because somebody cared enough to save it.
Yep.
Would have some diversity, you know, within the world of plants because insects are crossing things accidentally. Things evolve and change, but we wouldn't see nearly the complexity or the diversity we see without humans, you know, just falling in love with a variety and then saving it over time.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna share my screen here quick again just to mention this potato. So this is a potato called Grandpa Miller, and I love this potato so much just because we don't have a ton of pictures, you know, for everything either.
Yeah.
But this is one where the donor sent us this super adorable picture, and so you can see that this,
These are massive.
yeah. So this was donated to us. I don't have this in my notes for this presentation, so I unfortunately don't remember her name. But this little cutie sitting on the ground was actually her grandson that donated Grandpa Miller potato to us.
Wow.
Um, but she was the one that always called it Grandpa Miller because it had been in her family already for a couple generations as well. So she called it Grandpa Miller, continued to grow it as she grew up and her kids experienced it, and they kept the name Grandpa Miller as well. Yeah, and you can see it's a kind of a russet tomato or potato. It's really big.
Yeah.
It didn't go quite this big when we grew it on the farm, but we're hoping to grow it for a few more years and see if it can adapt to our region a little bit more and hopefully have it available for people to request.
Wow. Yeah, that would be fun to tackle growing those, but it'd be hard to get them out of the ground whole.
Mm-hmm. Gotta have a nice long fork.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you so much, Kathryn. This has been amazing. And thank you for also allowing our viewers to reach out over email. So I hope that they can connect with you and ask some good questions. So
great. We're here to teach. You know, we can keep seeds here within our vault. Those seeds are going to be here for generations, but in order to be, you know, kind of adapting to our changing environment and for people to enjoy them, we want you to be growing them and falling in them as well. So,
and just PSA that if anyone has family heirloom seeds or just a variety they love, to send them in to Seed Savers.
Yeah, reach out. You can email us. We recommend emailing us instead of sending us seed right away, because our seed historian will kind of go through a little bit of an interview process.
Great.
collect the history before we send the seed, or before we accept the seed. But yeah, we receive donations every year.
Oh, that's cool.
So,
Well, thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day.
yeah, thank you.
Have a good day.
You too.